Hey, what's up? Happy Monday to everybody. Just out walking the dog again. Thanks for coming in. Whew. I've spent the last probably 12 hours of my life listening to Zionist lives. Not their life story, just lives on TikTok. Hello, Eric, Enrica. Is that how you say it? Yeah, Enrica66. Hey, how are you? Yeah, painful. My pain is going to be your gain today. I'm going to talk about some of that stuff that I've been listening to. And there are a lot of common themes that I notice coming from the way people communicate around this issue. And the fundamental difference is the word why. In other words, what motivates the behavior. And this is really critical. And this is what people, in terms of having conversations, refuse to acknowledge or refuse to even engage in. And therein lies the problem, because if you explain this from a position of another person hating you and there's no reasoning with the person, it makes sense that there's no possibility to work with them and there can't be peace. But if some of what your side is doing is contributing to the problem, and maybe even in totality, obviously that's a whole different set of circumstances to have to acknowledge. And I think that's the rub, and I think that's the issue, in my opinion, that on these lives, that's all we should be talking about. Forget the history, forget about 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, Canaanites, Kingdom of David, all that horse shit. Forget about the Balfour Declaration, forget about all that stuff. The question is, why would a human being risk their life or give their life because they have nothing better to do? I mean, this is what you have to ask yourself. Why would the various things that have happened, including 10/7, but work your way back to the different intifadas, even just an individual in the West Bank? Why would somebody be motivated to do something? We don't act randomly as humans. We have emotions, we have community, we have a sense of pride, a desire to have freedom and autonomy. And when something gets in the way of those things or dramatically affects us, it affects us enough emotionally that we're then willing to respond in some way potentially. And the worse that gets, the more likely that response becomes. That's really what we need to be focused on here. All I've been hearing when I go to these lives is that what motivates the acts that we've seen on 10/7 and before is some sort of vile, random hatred towards Jewish people. And what they use as evidence of that is some of the statements that arguably, and I agree with this, have been vile, made by some of the leadership of the H group, where, for whatever reason, they haven't distinguished between Zionist and the word that they use called Jews, and they lump everybody into one category, which I think is wrong. And they say the Jews should be A, B, or C. Now, I can see why somebody would point to those statements by the leadership and say, see, they hate us all. All they want to do is get rid of us all. They want everything for themselves. But remember, extremists in every group make these brash statements, but rarely in politics do brash statements play out in reality. These are, angry sort of, shout outs of their frustration towards another group of people who they think are wronging them. It's not, first of all, it's not indicative of what they eventually accept, because people have to make some sort of compromise. Eventually, politics is compromise. But secondly, and more importantly, the proclamations of a few extreme leaders, first of all, is not necessarily indicative of the entirety of even that small subset of the group, which they would call the militants. But even if it were, it's not necessarily representative and probably isn't representative of the broad society. In other words, in terms of people who identify as Palestinians, there are over 3.4 million in the West Bank, and there's 2.1 million in Gaza or so, something like this. So there's about 5.5, 5.7 million total human beings. I've talked to probably several hundred Palestinians in my journey since I've been on TikTok and prior to coming online. And I will tell you this, I have never heard one of them say a disparaging word about Jewish people, not one ever. The only thing that they seem interested in, and I don't think they're lying to me, they want freedom from this burden they feel they're under. They don't feel good about the original, what happened in 1948 to their grandparents or parents if they're still alive. They don't like that, but they also realize that the situation is sort of, somewhat in the rearview mirror as far as the state is concerned. But the 1967 borders is a different thing. What they want is they want something. They want something to alleviate the pain of this long-term burden. And they want an alleviation from the oppression that continues. Now, Israelis will say, pro-Israelis will say, well, there is no occupation. Israel won that territory fair and square, so they're just ruling over it. Well, yeah, you can view it that way. But if you're trying to have peace, if you sincerely, as a pro-Israeli, want to have peace, you can say from a legal standpoint, it's yours. And so therefore the people have to kind of just deal with it. But if you want those people not to act on that same emotion that we referred to moments ago, you have to give them something that involves hope. If somebody's in a hopeless situation and they've tried everything they can on a peaceful basis to change their circumstances and they cannot, and because of another party's security interest, they justify anything they choose to do to you. You know, whether it involves firearms, whether it involves settlers, whether it involves running over, whatever it may be, they justify it. And I guess sometimes in small instances, if somebody's trying to do something directly against a soldier or some kind of, there might be moments when it can be less egregious for what they do. But in most cases, unfortunately, what the Israelis choose to do, and they base it on their own security interests, is to brutalize and unnecessarily antagonize Palestinians. And why do they do that? We've had soldiers come out as a part of breaking the silence, Israeli soldiers, that have said as much. They said it is standard policy in their units to go into Palestinian homes in the West Bank or East Jerusalem, terrorize the family, humiliate the father, and take over the place as an operating base just to terrorize them and let them know who's in charge. That's not security. That is not security. And even someone like Rudy from the Modern Democrat has said, when I bring these things up, he's like, yeah, that's messed up. That needs to change. These are the things that opened my eyes when I first learned about this in 1989 that really upset me the most, because I thought Israel was the good guy. And I thought that they're just trying to protect themselves. It's like, why the hell are they doing all these things? So this is the problem. Now, when you talk to people who are pro-Zionist, and there may be some here, if you are, glad you're here to listen in. I think we all have to look at the other person's point of view. I think from the Israeli point of view, they don't want to be attacked. They want to maintain their security. They want to have a safe place for the Jewish people. That's what drives them. This never again mindset, this interconnection between their perceived safety as a people, as an individual with their people, and the state that they think is protective of them. They've been convinced that that's all one thing. Okay, I get it. That's their point of view. However, and think of this for a second. If you're antagonizing somebody and you're cracking down on them more and more because you can, because you have the power, are they more likely or less likely to befriend you, to work peacefully with you? In other words, if you're looking for the acquiescing of a people to work with you, and yet you brutalize them and oppress them, occupy them, antagonize them, give them no hope for their own future. They've tried peacefully for decades, and every time there's a conversation, a negotiation, there's no real deals offered. It's all bullshit. And on top of that, all the party does is lie to the world and make you look like the bad guys while they're giving you no chance to do anything that you can. So what are your options at that point? You have bad and worse as your options. You can decide I guess you could decide to lay down and just take it, right? You could do that. And I would argue that with regard to how things have been divvied up in the West Bank, with areas A, B, and C, that's a cop-out. The Abbas administration have sold out the Palestinian people in the West Bank for their own benefit, to stay in power and to be able to have power to be corruptive. It's the same old thing. It's happening with the other Arab governments. Now, from the Palestinian perspective, if you're someone who perceives it's the circumstances you find yourself in or the people with whom you support, that is what drives them, it's not hatred of Jews, it's not Islamic fundamentalism, it is anger based on mistreatment, abuse, and a lack of a hopeful future. Here's my question to people who support Israel. Just say if it is the final motivator, the thing about the land, the dispossession, the Nakba, the injustice, the brutality, the mistreatment, the perception, again, you can say it's wrong, but the perception that someone else is controlling your life and making your people miserable, unaliving them, etc., like we're seeing now, if that's how they truly feel, regardless of what you think is right and wrong from your point of view, if you really want peace with them, then what you have to do is deal with that perception. And I believe that perception is valid given the circumstances. Others think that I'm wrong and I'm partisan for making that determination. You can be an analyst and decide and make a conclusion based on your analysis, but not do it from a standpoint of like supporting one side or the other. It's just you're saying, I see these variables and I understand the context enough to say, hey, this is unfair and this needs to be fixed. That's my point of view. Other people disagree. They think that the existence of the resistance, that the attacks that have been done for decades, that those things in and of themselves are condemnable prima facie, and there's no other conversation to be had. That's their point of view. That's what Rudy said. I was on the live till like 4 in the morning last night. Crazy. And he starts to go into these rants about 1070. He's like, Chip, these people invaded Israel, Chip. These people unalive, brutalized, they're great people, Chip. These people are savages, Chip. And he puts this, what I call false dichotomy, where you either support Israel because you think they're the right, or you support the H group and all the barbarity that went on, the specific tactics. That is a false dichotomy. Somebody says, well, who do you support? You support H, you support. It's not that simple. There is nuance involved. And the concept that I think most people who aren't Palestinian, or even those who are Palestinian, they're not supporting necessarily the H group as an administrator or the way they took over power and all the violence that took place with Fatah, the buildings and such. But they have a soft spot in their heart for the concept of not giving up and doing something rather than nothing to try to alleviate the circumstances in which their people find themselves. And that means supporting the concept of some form of other pathway, which in this case happens to be violence resistance. Would they prefer to have something peaceful? Of course. The only reason that they would be supportive of H group is not because they're maniacs and they hate Jewish people and they want to be on a Muslim caliphate. It's because they're so frustrated. And they see what the government's doing in the West Bank, and like, these guys are selling their people out there, giving the Israelis control and kind of trying to coexist with their occupier. As Hassan Kanafani said, great interview. He says, how can you have a conversation? The neck cannot talk to the knife. There's no conversation between the neck and the knife. You have to get rid of the knife. What the Israelis, I'm sure they realize this. Nobody's stupid on that side. And they've tried, I think, very proactively to stop this from happening, obviously. If you look at what Netanyahu has said publicly, he said, hey, if you want to stop a two-state solution, we have to support and strengthen H group. Because having that political divide makes them weaker. And if you have people literally throwing people off of buildings because they disagree on how to approach this issue, that's obviously indicative of a lot of strife between the parties. The more chaos you sow and the more discord you can sow, it's a standard tactic of power to divide and conquer. It's happening right now in our country. I was on a couple lives today listening into the left-right politics, the Trump versus Biden crowds. And all they're doing is vilifying each other. They're not looking at their common interests. They're only looking at their differences and then kind of trying to own each other. It's silly, childish, petty behavior, but it's all too prevalent in human existence. So here's what I think should be challenged in these conversations. When you hear people who are pro-Israel start to say, these people are out of control, they're violent, they have no chance of being peaceful, I say this: had they ever had a chance to have autonomy and peace? And they've never had that opportunity. So how do we know, given that opportunity, if they would behave differently? And my guess is, because of just the absolute strong focus on some sort of autonomous outcome, they would be willing to stop the resistance if there was something that no longer required it. For example, if Israel withdrew from the West Bank, dismantled the settlements, or just took off, and the pre-1967 borders became the new delineation between the two parties, which I don't think is going to happen, but if that were to occur, I believe that they would reconcile politically to some extent, because the reason why there was a split in the first place is because they believed that there was not enough progress being made to reverse what I just said. That's the reason behind the resistance. This is what the pro-Israelis don't understand, or they just ignore. And so the point is, if you want peace, you can't have your boot on somebody's neck and then tell them act nice. That's unrealistic. And because of this, one of the least safe places to be if you're Jewish, which is not supposed to be the case, is if you live in Israel. And that defeats the purpose of having a homeland for Jewish people, which I, as an independent observer, want to see people be safe. I'm not sure that carving out of that particular territory the way it was done was the right way to do it. I think it was immoral, but it has happened. So I would like to see a one-state solution that would be more equitable, one person, one vote with potentially an Arab majority. and people finding a way to get along with each other. I think that would be the fairest outcome, but I don't think that's realistic. I don't think anything's going to happen. So for those of you who haven't heard the news, I'm sure you have, unless you're living under a rock. So the Israeli military recently, right after the ICJ came out with their proclamation saying, hey, Israel, you need to stop your offensive operations in Rafah. You have to do it. It's just not acceptable to keep moving. What did they do the next 24 hours? They claim they targeted two militants that were, quote, commingling themselves in a civilian area in the western part of Rafah, where the people have been told is going to be a safe zone. And they dropped some very large BOMBS and artillery at some spots where it caused massive damage. And I think like 40 some people lost their life, a lot more injured. Just total devastation. This is what Israel does, okay? Now, could there have been militants there? I guess it's possible. But when you watch what they do for year after year, decade after decade, they're always making these kind of claims. Oh, there was a bad guy there, so we did. You can always say that. How does anybody confirm that? And herein lies the problem. When somebody becomes a serial liar, and then they say, trust me, there was somebody there. How can you? It's like the boy who cried wolf. When you lie for the 17th time and then say number 18, hey, this is true, believe me, it's impossible to take that seriously. Now, if there's evidence that supports that, I don't know, man. And then as far as the calculation goes, if you have two guys holding up a bank, do you bring an aircraft and bomb the bank and kill 37 people? I don't think so. So the way they kind of, in this very warped fashion, justify what they call collateral damage, what I would call callous disregard for Palestinian life, at best, or intentionally unaliving them at worst, which I believe happens all too frequently, although not entirely in every case, therein lies the problem. And that's why the ICJ is investigating them. They got better things to do than to try to look into a conflict and just sort of solo out one country. Why the hell would they do that? They do it based on the evidence, the behavior, right? So, yeah, somebody just mentioned karma. If there is karma in the world, I believe there is, what's going to happen to the state of Israel is going to be very bad. And I don't wish that on the people. But in the end, for those, like they say in Gaza, they claim that up to 80% of civilians support the H group in Gaza. That's their claim, I keep hearing. So therefore, because they are, quote, supporters of the H group, whatever befalls them is fair game because they're considered to be allies of the people that are their enemy. Okay, well, if you're going to apply that logic, then the 80-some% of Israelis who want the government to do even more offensive damage to Gaza, well, if you're going to use the same standard, they have to be fair game, right? They have to be fair game. So I don't believe in either case, either is accurate. I believe that civilians, even if they support the political apparatus and the war efforts, that they should be excluded from harm, unless they're actively taking up arms or doing things that are logistically supporting same. That's just my point of view. But again, you have to use the same standard. Part of the problem with Israelis is they've been indoctrinated, or people who support Israel, and those who have broken from this indoctrination have spoken to this. There's a great book by Miko Peled, P-E-L-E-D. It's called The General's Son. If there's anybody on here who is an Israel supporter, I'm sure they are. First of all, I'm not vilifying you or making you out to be a bad person. I believe that even good people can not be fully aware of things. I've certainly been in that position in my life. I don't think I'm a totally bad person, but there's certainly things that I've supported in my life that when I found out other things, I stopped supporting. And I think that there's still going to be things I'm going to find out as time goes by that I don't know now. We never know what we don't know because we don't know it until we encounter it, right? So I believe that probably about 95% of people who support Israel are completely unaware of some of the things that I've been discussing today. They just don't know that their government does these things, and they believe the way the government speaks to them. And why would they doubt it? Because they believe their country is righteous, and they don't do anything intentional, and they punish people who do the bad apples, quote unquote. But any of us who've been watching this for some time, including just what's happened in Gaza, but especially over the years, this is standard practice in Israel, standard practice. And don't get me started on people who are in jail. I mean, that's a whole other horror story. We won't even get into that. So to paint yourself as moral, but then do things that are the opposite of how you portray yourself is obviously hypocritical and inconsistent and worthy of condemnation, in my opinion. Same thing goes for the United States government. I don't hate America. I don't hate Americans, but I strongly disagree with American policy. where it has harm. I think that's fair to make a differentiation between the two. So this idea that if you criticize Israel, that you just hate the Jews and all you care about is ethnically cleansing the Jews and everybody's out to get us and all this other bullshit, that's a deflection mechanism to not focus on some of the facts that are unpleasant and unflattering to Israel. Now, what's going to solve this, right? What's going to change this whole dynamic? I think the number one benefit, and we talked about this over and over again, and this is what I talked about in Rudy's live last night. This is indisputable, okay? The opinion, that the shape and awareness of public opinion has shifted drastically away from supporting Israel and towards supporting the Palestinian resistance. Now, does that mean that people support the atrocities on 10/7? Of course not. Most people, just normal people, are repulsed by whatever happened on that day that's been documented and that can be substantiated. And there is some confusion there, but I do think, just to let the public know, and I've told people I would speak to this, that there were three probably likely incidents of SA that occurred on 10/7. I don't know who did it. It could have been the H group. It could have been civilians that poured out. But it looks as if the testimony and the analysis by an independent UN group, and again, if we're going to use the UN as a legitimate, entity, we have to look at things that are, supported and necessarily, unflattering, to be fair, that those things occurred. What was not shown, though, just to be clear, was systematic use. In other words, it wasn't determined or has not been determined that there was like this edict that went out from the H group leadership says, go and do X, Y, and Z to as many women as possible, which is what's been alleged, that it was used as a widespread tool of war. There's no evidence to back that up right now. There's some other claims about a pregnant woman and a bunch of kids, zip tied together with a bunch of lighters, blah, blah, blah. There's no evidence for that. None of that. There's no evidence for, little babies. There's no evidence for the head stuff. That stuff all remains, unsubstantiated. Now, certain people say, I got all the pictures. So I've had about a dozen people say this to me. I've probably spent 30 hours of my time checking out things that they've sent me to go look at or whatever. And none of it includes that stuff. And then they say something like, well, our traditions don't allow us to show pictures of people that have passed away because it's disrespectful. Okay, fair enough. But if that's going to be the thing you put up as why you can't provide evidence, you have to understand that creates seeds of doubt among people just because they don't get to see it. Not that anybody like me deserves to see anything, but if I'm going to speak to it and try to be consistent, I have evidence last night, if you don't know, Israel attacked the tent city west of Rafah that was supposed to be designated as a safe zone. And I talked about the 40-some people that were unalived and all the injuries. But right after this, a video came out. And again, I don't want to be too graphic. Can't show it. But it showed a father picking up what is the flimsy, flopping torso, arms, legs, and body of a little toddler with no, none of what I'm circling right now. None of what you're looking at right now. That was gone. So they tell stories initially about 40 Israeli babies having that part removed, which turned out to be completely false. And yet, when we actually have live video showing a father carrying his child that has no upper extremity, that somehow is considered to be non-worthy of news because it's just a Palestinian, right? So this is video. Now listen, when people say I'm unfair, video evidence is video evidence, unless it's some sort of AI orchestration false video, which I don't think this was. That's seeing with your own two eyes, and that's what's changed this. I said in the live today, they wouldn't let me come up, which is fine. But I said in the comments, the biggest difference is the PR war. Because in war, they say the first casualty of war is truth. The first casualty of war is truth. Ruby, come on. Come on. Just a sec. My dog just did a little duty in the middle of the sidewalk. Hold on, dog. Come here. Look out. Come here. Oh, just a sec, guys. Pretty gross. There we go. Okay. All right, dog, come on. The first casualty of war is truth, meaning that every side tries to paint things in a way that's favorable to them. Number of casualties, everybody exaggerates the number on the other side they got, and they also minimize the number that they think the enemy got for their side. It's all the same stuff. And this is what Israel's very good at, by the way. But I think they miscalculated this time. The Netanyahu group has always been able to manage the media. in a way that's been very favorable to Israel for decades. But this time they miscalculated because they didn't think that it would be any different, but it has been. And the fact that we have these devices and people are having these absolutely visceral reactions to videos like the one we just talked about, and dozens and hundreds of others, this has turned people against Israel, and it's woken people up from a sleep on a lot of other issues. You know, I know a lot of older people. I'm 57. Not many people in my age group necessarily have the same inclination to look at this stuff. And anybody older than me, like 65, 70, might not be involved at all with smartphones, or maybe older, I don't know. But the younger generation, they live and breathe on these things. They get all their information from it. They are texting their friends all the time. You know, this is part of their body necessarily. It's just part of life. And because of that, I think Israel miscalculated. That's why they're trying to kick out people down there who are basically journalists for Al Jazeera, Palestinians. They targeted journalists because they are vastly losing the information war, which is something they're not used to, by the way. And we know this because we heard a recorded conversation of the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. This is going back about 2 months ago. And he said, folks, we don't have a left-right problem. We have an age problem. We have an old-young problem. We have a TikTok problem. And what he knows is, he knows that people are not dumb. We are emotional creatures. And when we see absolute brutality, the worst that mankind has to offer, and that is attached to Israel as standard practice, obviously it's going to turn people against their government. And it has, en masse. And that is the biggest difference that's come out of this chapter. And it didn't start on 10/7, for all of you who are saying that they started it. It didn't start jack shit. Israel, within the last week before the conflict started, unalived 4 people in Gaza. Just so you didn't know, I was talking about breaking the ceasefire. So Israel always says that it's always the H group that sends rockets to break the ceasefire. Almost always, the latest barrage of rockets come in response to Israeli aggression. Just the way it is. Now remember, the other thing that we hear in these lives is they say that the H group is representative of all Palestinians, meaning that if you're Palestinian and the attacks that happened on 10/7, you're in the West Bank, you had nothing to do with it. You're being attacked by settlers, for God's sakes, like Wally Rashid's family. You had nothing to do with this. You're trying to go through your life as difficult as it is. You have no clue what's going on over there. And yet you're tied into and blamed for this attack. And now soldiers will brutalize you as punishment for what they believe to be your direct connection to this, which of course is nonsense. So this is all part of the problem. This has been admitted to by Israeli soldiers, which recently came out. They did it anonymously, but they talked about like an outdoor prison camp where the prisoners, the detainees, were being horribly mistreated, having their bones broken, having their teeth knocked out, you know, having to sit in really horrible positions for days on end, having the twist ties around their hands so tightly bound that they had to amputate their extremities. This is the kind of crap that Israel does and does not inform anybody. Nobody from the Israeli side finds out about this brutality. This is what angers people. If you knew that your cousin, your friends, just look how angry people were after 10/7 in Israel. Now imagine if that went on, not on one day, but every single week for your entire life. Not to the same extent that it was on 10/7, but if the aggregate damage caused over many decades is, 10 to 15 to 20 times more people hurt and unalived, what difference does it make whether it happens on one day or over the course of 10 years? It's way worse. If you do the math, so you can go to Google right now. Here, this is a great exercise to do for those who think I'm full of crap. Go to Google and type in deaths from Israel-Palestinian conflict since 1950. Go type that into Google, and you're going to look at it and be like, oh my God. Now, if you go back before 1950, you look at what happened leading up to the establishment of the State of Israel, we hear about, oh my God, there was the Hebron massacre. Oh my God, all these Jewish people. Yeah, listen, there were fights back and forth on both sides. Guess how many casualties were incurred by Israel? And guess how many casualties were incurred by quote unquote Arabs? Not even close. And herein lies the problem. The Israelis will focus on individual events and go, see, they hate the Jews, they hate the Jews. But they don't look at their own actions, and they're not even aware of their own actions. And this is a huge problem. This is like a narcissist that blames everybody around them, but can never look in the mirror and see their own faults. And that's a huge problem. Now, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. I was on like a political talk show today on TikTok. A guy that has a pretty sizable audience, by the way. I mean, good for him for generating a sizable following. And he goes by RTP, like Richard Tom Preston Talks, RPT Talks. And he usually has a co-host who's, I believe, a pretty bright woman. I really enjoy her. His style, again, I like people that are polite, that can see the difference between their views and others, and not say that anybody who disagrees with them is a complete moron. Anyway, but I believe he's disrespectful in that regard. But I came up, and the argument we were talking about, he was saying, do you support Donald Trump? All this bullshit. So what I came up and talked about was, the nuance that's involved, and the fact that we have this crazy divide, and everyone's bickering back and forth about who's the idiot voting for Biden or who's the moron voting for MAGA. And meanwhile, many of the common issues that we all share, who wants money in politics? Not me. Who wants to have Citizens United allowing for that money to be unlimited? Not me. Who wants crony capitalism? Not me. Not most people. Who wants to have a healthcare system that drains the wallets of families and makes healthcare executives have $30 million salaries? Not me. Not most people. Who wants to be coaxed by big pharma such that our system of food makes everybody sick? And then what do they need? They need drugs from pharma. We have this cycle of sick care instead of prevention. I don't like that. Most people probably don't like that either. We have a food industry that covers our produce and our packaged foods in poison, literally poisoning the public to feed that same cycle of surgery and drugs. I don't think most people like that. I don't think most people think that education should be something that's not available, or that kids should be saddled with $200,000 of student debt for life that they can never get out from under. I think most people don't want that, et cetera, et cetera. So there's probably 20 or 30 things that most working class people and non-one percenters can agree upon, right? But all these fools do is get on there and vilify the other because they disagree on one or the other issues or whatever. Or they think that Trump is a criminal who's an election denier, or that Biden is an old senile guy who can't see straight and finish a sentence. It's all irrelevant. And yes, elections do affect some things, but all of the issues that I just talked about that are sewn up in a nice pretty bow by the corporate elite and the national security state and the war machine, that shit is not changing. That shit is not going to change no matter who gets elected in Congress or in the presidency. And the Supreme Court is stacked with pro-corporate judges and establishment supporters. So if anything does even make it to the Supreme Court, it's going to get blocked there. It's heads they win, tails we lose. That's the system we're in. I tried to have that conversation with this guy, and he just goes ballistic. So there are people that just don't see the landscape as I believe it is, which is okay. I don't have some, I don't have a monopoly on truth, but it is frustrating that most Americans believe in the election system. And people say, well, what else can we do? And I talk about a lot of times what's going to have to happen, which is very difficult. But anyway, so getting back to Zionism. The problem with Zionism, they say it's just the establishment of Israel. They go, Zionism just means Israel, it's already done, it's finished. No, it doesn't. What Zionism means, it supports a chosen people mindset. It supports an arrogance and an indifference to the suffering of others. It places the needs and wants of Jewish people in that land above anybody who is non-Jewish. And if you need any answers to confirm that, talk to anybody who lives as a non-Jewish person in Israeli society, especially if you're a person of color. Even if you're Jewish and a person of color, but especially if you're somebody who's either Arab Palestinian or Arab, let's say Moroccan or Egyptian or whatever you may be, you can navigate the system. The laws do allow for navigation, but it's difficult. And it's not geared towards full equality. It says it on paper, but just like in America, try going and buying a house in an all-white neighborhood if you're a black person. It doesn't go well. So you get the idea. There's what's on the books, and there's what happens in real life. That is considered sort of like a racist apartheid system, just within Israel. Now, it's not as severe as in the West Bank. What's in the West Bank is unthinkably horrible. They have their own citizens in these settlements, these illegal settlements that everyone has condemned since the beginning, including the United States. They're under Israeli civilian law. However, the Palestinians that are unfortunate enough to be excluded from the benefits of that system, they don't get citizenship, even though Israel claims it's their territory, they're under military rule. Totally different set of ways of life. So they are treated far differently than the average Israeli. That's why they talk about apartheid. Not that it's formally written up in the law, But in practice, if you're living as a Palestinian in a territory where your family's lived for hundreds of years, or maybe you were displaced in 48, you're treated totally differently than someone who travels from New York State, who has nothing to do with Israel or their lineage to the land, and yet they make Aliyah or do a birthright trip, and they decide, I'm moving to a settlement, and I'm going to get a $50,000 subsidy from Israel, and I'm going to have my birthright trip paid for by the government, and they're allowed to come in there and just park down and have a good life. And meanwhile, Palestinians who are from there, who have since had to scatter, can't even go there. They're from there, and they can't even go there. Oh, Quinn's here. Nice to see you, Quinn. We'll bring you up in a second if you want to come up. Yeah, Quinn, I think, is in the UK now. He just put out a video about the attack on the refugee camp. Fucking disgusting. Anyway, I get riled up about this stuff because, listen, it's about unfair. Nobody's perfect. Both sides have things that can be criticized. But if you look back at the original sin, what really drives this from the get-go, it's the Nakba. Let's face it. And that Nakba was justified. You heard the notes of David Ben Gurion, their first prime minister. He said, why would any Arab make a deal with the Jews? We're here to take their land. We're colonizing their land. I know from our point of view, God gave it to us, but they don't care about our God. So he saw it for what it was. This is pure and simple colonization and land theft. Dispossession of land, mistreatment, humiliation, and no concern for the lives and the safety of others. That's how I see it. And I wish it weren't that way. In fact, I've said often, if Israel would do something praiseworthy, I would praise Israel. I would love nothing more than to say, gee, they really have made a good compromise. This is a great offer. I think Palestinians should accept this offer. This is a great way to resolve this issue. I would love those words to come out of my mouth. Guess what? The Israeli leadership, under all prime ministerships, not just the Netanyahus and the crazies, they've all done things to prevent it from happening. They've all increased the settlements. They've all antagonized Palestinians to make them more miserable with the hopes that they'll leave. And some people have left Gaza. They have enough money to get out. But most people, like Ghassan Kanafani, look him up on the internet. Look up Kanafani. He had a great, great interview with a British broadcaster where he said, why don't you just talk to these? Why don't you talk? He's like, talk about what? He's like, talk about peace. What peace? And he says, when has a national liberation movement ever met and had peace with its oppressor? It doesn't exist. You can't have a discussion between the knife and the neck, because one person's always holding the upper hand. And as long as Israel takes advantage of this upper hand that it has, listen, it's got the United States, the biggest superpower in the history of the world, which is riddled with pro-Israel and Zionist influences all across the board, economically, politically. And you have that reality. And the biggest thing in the arsenal is not just the military strength and the money, but it's the veto among the Permanent Security Council at the UN. Because every resolution that's come up for vote that almost every other country supports is vetoed by the United States. In fact, something like 65 or 70% of all the vetoes ever used in the history of the US at the UN is for pro-Israel issues, or to allow Israel to escape accountability for its crimes. Thanks, Glenn. Well, listen, like I said, it's not about taking, quote, the Palestinian side, although that's the side I end up on. It's taking the side of the dynamics. And if the dynamics shift, so will my conversations around it. I would love nothing more than if the leadership in Israel decided finally, or if its people were able to somehow, the people who are more conciliatory, who don't like the occupation, who realizes it's a net negative, if they would do something that would create autonomy and self-determination for a people who are so desperate for it, and stop the killing, of course, I believe that would lead to at least a dramatic drop in tensions, if not a complete peace. And it could be monitored by a third party, whether it be the United States or some international peacekeeping group. It could be the Chinese. Who cares what it is? But I do believe that the more militant armed, even though they speak about from the river to the sea, if Israel today said, you know what, we're sick of this shit, we're going to dismantle the settlements, we're going to give you all the territory, pre-1967, let's have peace. I think 99.9% of people from Palestine would say, you know what, let's do it. I don't think they're going to continue to hatefully try to attack somebody for that other part of the equation. There's some might, but I think that would be at least, and it's not for me to tell people what they should think, but from my point of view, I think that would be a tremendous outcome. Not perfect, but things are rarely perfect in terms of negotiations. But if you offer somebody a shit sandwich and then blame them for not eating lunch with you, that's just fucking idiotic. And if you really want to have peace for your people, if you really care about your people, if you really care about your hostages, you will do something that represents that care and not continue with a brutal and unnecessary occupation that is just completely indifferent to Palestinian life. Hey, what's up? I'm doing a little live broadcast, but I'll take a quick pause. Doggies. Hey, doggies. So anyway, if anybody would like to come up, including Quinn, I'd love to have Quinn come up or whomever else wants to come up. And even if you're pro-Israeli and you think that I'm full of crap and you want to correct me and straighten me out, I want to learn as much as I can. If I'm getting this wrong, please correct me, because maybe I just don't understand. Maybe I'm just an idiot. Okay. Anybody want to come up and talk? I'm happy to have you come up. We have about 200 people. It's Memorial Day, which is the day that the U.S. is supposed to be commemorating the sacrifices made by its military service members who have unfortunately given the ultimate sacrifice. You know, for me as a former Army officer in a combat zone who was in actually war, which is horrible, I have mixed feelings because when I was younger, I did it because I was younger. I didn't know a whole lot. And I didn't know much about what the U.S. was really doing. I started to learn a lot as I went through that experience. That's what sort of kicked off my deep digging that I continue to do. Bottom line is, you know, the U.S. military is a tool of imperialism and empire. And it's not driven solely by the U.S. government. It's driven by those same influences that tend to use these instruments towards their ends. So you got an international oligarchy. You can talk about the bankers, tie it back to Zionism if you want. I don't know the extent of all that, although I think it does play a role. But you have a set of common interests between the wealthy class and the national security state who tend to work in concert, and they co-opt government to their own ends. And they use pressure and rewards and punishments to achieve what they want, which is to pay less taxes, to have policies set up that give them a greater chance to control countries, labor, resources, and dominate the energy resources and other key resources of the world while limiting access of its rivals for the same. That's it. That's what's going on. And everything, if you look at through that set of glasses, everything makes sense. Everything makes sense. So if you don't know this, and this is just fits right in with that same puzzle, Antony Blinken, the U.S., God forbid, Secretary of State, which I believe is one of the worst we've ever had. He's a rank amateur, incompetent, well above his pay grade. He's just, my goodness. Anyway, I don't know if you saw recently, but he visited Ukraine, which is a complete disaster for U.S. foreign policy. It's a really big disaster for the Ukrainian civilians and military because Russia's just whooping their ass. And there's nothing the U.S. can do about it. And that's a whole other issue. I'll get into it. But the bottom line is Blinken, he plays the guitar, and he went up on stage with some band and started playing guitar and singing at a bar in Kiev. This is what kind of a jackass diplomat we have in the United States that just has no sense of the severity of what he's doing. These lives that are being lost, this just meat grinder that's been put in place for the civilians of Ukraine, the citizens that have been conscripted and forcibly shoved into vans and sent off to the front lines to be mercilessly slammed by Russian artillery. And you think that baby from last night was bad? You should see some of the images of these soldiers who get hit by some of these Russian artillery. It's pretty disgusting. Anyway, we can talk about Ukraine quite a bit because that's the other thing. When I went on that RTP Talks today, it's by the way, I didn't know as much about this as I should have going into the Ukraine conflict, so I did a lot of catch up. And there's some people I should thank for helping me kind of get on that track. But once you dig deep behind the U.S. empire and the Western narrative, and you start to learn the factors that precipitated the war, it gives you a totally different angle from which to view things. Now, I don't say that I agree with war, and I don't agree with invasions. But you understand the position that the Russians ended up being in vis-a-vis how the Allied powers and NATO and how the U.S. was basically infiltrating and effing with the political system in Ukraine and again just completely co-opting a foreign government to the interests of the U.S. national security interests as well as the oligarchy. It's always the same shit. Anyway, so if anybody wants to come up and talk, I welcome you. It's always fun to have a guest. I don't want to invite anybody or put them on the spot. I don't know what Quinn's doing, but Quinn, I'm sure people would love to hear from you. I'm sure people have seen your videos, but it's always nice to see your smiling face and have you share your thoughts on whatever it may be, even if it's just your latest adventures. Yeah, so somebody said, well, somebody just said Russia got more NATO. Yeah, this is the problem. If you don't know that NATO did add Finland, which is on the northwestern border of Russia. But here's the thing. In all the former attacks, Finland is a very northern Arctic country. It's a Scandinavian country. It is not a very good pathway to invade Russia. All of the major invasions of Russia in history have come through the flatlands of Ukraine. That's why it's so strategically important to their national security. I mean, just imagine for a second if Saskatchewan, which is the very flatlands of the north central United States, north of North Dakota and South Dakota, imagine if the Chinese convinced the Canadians to allow them to join the military alliance, or at least move towards that, and start equipping their military and rockets so they could point weapons at the United States. Do you think the US government would allow any of that stuff to even get started? Of course not. That's a direct threat. We know from history that when the Russians put missiles in Cuba, what did the US do? What did President Kennedy do? First of all, they had a failed invasion in the Bay of Pigs, which was orchestrated behind Kennedy's back, which he was totally pissed about. And that was the dullest, all the dullest CIA fucks. But he decided to do an entire blockade of Cuba, which, by the way, still exists to this day. Cuba is still being strangled. That's why they have cars from 1950. They're not allowed to have a whole bunch of things. It's very similar to what Israel does to Gaza and to the West Bank. They disallow things from entering Cuba. So this is their life. This is all part of U.S. imperialism. And why do they do that? They don't like the government of Cuba. They don't like a socialist government because in the 1950s, if you know how Cuba was structured, the U.S. corporations were down there taking grave advantage of the Cuban people while the corrupt leader was getting rich. This is standard imperial practice. It was the revolution led by Fidel Castro that changed all the variables. Same thing with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. It's always the same thing. Exploitation happens, people get angry, people can't take it anymore, they rebel, and boom, that's why they change. That's why the US opposes these regimes. Because why? Because they do not have a foothold to control the country for its resources and its strategic locations. That's it. So as far as Russia and Finland is concerned, Russia understands the key variables of NATO. If you're somebody who thinks that Russia is the total instigator of all this, it wasn't Russia that expanded its military alliance westward towards Western Europe. It was the United States and NATO that expanded NATO eastward towards Russia after promising in 1990 that if the Soviet Union, when it was collapsing, agreed to allow East and West Germany to reunify, which, by the way, East Germany was part of what they called the Warsaw Pact, the buffer countries between the Soviet Union and it was all Eastern Europe, that if East and West Germany were allowed to be incorporated in NATO, Secretary of State James Baker promised the Russians, or the Soviets at that time, that NATO would not expand, quote, 1 inch to the east, not 1 inch. And then over the next few decades, guess what happened? NATO added 15 and now 17 member states, all of which go towards Russia. Now, why is it that the United States, I'm going to park that issue to let Quinn come up. We'll continue that talk. So here comes Quinn. I'm so glad to have him here. Brother, can you hear us? We can hear some background noise, but not you. I think your connection may be muffled. Yeah, I can't hear you speaking. I can hear some shuffling in the background. If you can hear me. It might be good to try to reconnect, maybe. Yeah, I don't know if Quinn, I'm going to drop you, Quinn. Come on back. I'm going to write. Can somebody write in the notes to Quinn that we cannot hear him well and that he needs to come back into TikTok? Yeah, thank you, Maz. Hi, Maz, by the way. Hi. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know the full story about Ukraine, again, this is not about browbeating people who, and this is not about telling you you're wrong. But if you want to try to get a more, rounded perspective, if you're open to that, Professor John Mearsheimer, Mearsheimer, John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, talks about big power politics on the international stage. He will explain, if you go to his YouTube, he will explain all of the variables that led up to The conflict becomes different. Okay, Quinn, are you there? I think we still have a bad connection. Yeah, we still have a bad connection. Naz, can you repeat that in the comments, please? Unfortunately, there we go. What he may have to do is get to a different signal, which I'm not sure in the UK where he is, and or maybe just reset the phone with airplane mode or something. Anyway, so the reason why I changed my view on the situation in Ukraine, there's also a really good documentary. And this is a big turning point, by the way. If you're not aware of what happened in 2014, all we ever hear is, oh my God, the Russians invaded and took over Crimea. That's all we heard. That's what we heard. That was like an unjustified attack. All they did was steal the land. Well, first of all, if you don't know this, during the Soviet era, Ukraine was gifted by Nikita Khrushchev as a separate entity under the Soviet Union. It was all Russian territory before that. So it was created as a separate entity, and it got its independence in 1990 when the Soviet Union dissolved. But since then, Russia has their only accessible warm water port at Sevastopol on the southwestern tip of Ukraine. So there's been a Russian presence there, or as far as like Russians or Soviets, for decades. It's almost like Guantanamo Bay in Cuba kind of thing. Even though it's Ukrainian territory, the Russian part of it is sovereign. So it's sort of a weird connection. But the Russians knew that if that territory fell to the west, they would lose access to that port, which is a critical national security asset to the Russian Navy. Again, just imagine if the tip of Florida was going to be, the entire East Coast was being taken over by a foreign entity, and we wouldn't have any ports on the East Coast of the United States. Imagine what the U.S. would do. They'd freak the F out, right? It's no different. So there was a coup that took place in Ukraine in 2014, where the rightfully and democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, was removed from office through a violent shooting rampage at a Maidan protest. And the reason why they wanted to get rid of him, the Western powers, is because he was going to align with the Russians on a large economic package after having flirted with the EU for quite some time. At the last minute, Russia offered him a better deal, and he was going to take it. Well, the U.S. said, no, not going to happen. And they started a skirmish where about 106 people lost their lives, including police and protesters. It was called the Maidan Massacre. And it was perpetrated, allegedly, by those more militant groups like the Aidar Battalion or the Azov Battalion, those neo-Nazis in Ukraine. But it was blamed on the Yanukovych government as if they had tried to suppress the protesters, and that's what led to his being expelled, because there were so many angered citizens that believed the reports that it was Yanukovych that did it, that he got chased out of town and fled to Belarus, to the north. So it's an interesting story, but that was never told to the Americans. We got this, Russia just decided to go in. This evil dictator wants to reestablish the Soviet Union. Give me a break. That is third grade level, cartoonish descriptions of what happens in life. And unfortunately, most Americans, they buy this shit. They just take whatever the TV says as truth. My family, they turn on MSNBC, and whatever those talking heads say, they read off the teleprompter. They're like, like lemmings. Okay, Putin bad, Putin bad. And I'm not saying Putin's a sweetheart, but I am saying that he had legitimate national interest to consider that as an option, which was, by the way, he had poor options at the time. He had tried desperately to seek peace. And if you don't know this, Andrea, nope, no anti-Semitism here. That's a diversion tactic that is basically used by people who support Israel to try to take down critics of the Israeli government and the Zionist movement. And so what they do is they paint anybody who they think is trying to be critical of them, which they find threatening. And so they use the anti-Semite card. They do it very effectively in politics, but it doesn't work in the realm of free speech. You're not going to cancel my job. You're not going to threaten me. You can send your Mossad lackeys out to unalive me. That's about all you got. But I'm a flea on the dog's ass. I'm nobody. But no, there is no anti-Semitism. That's the biggest lie going. But that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? If anybody criticizes Israel, they're really doing it because they hate the Jewish people, right? And that's the only reason why they have anything to say, because it's just like a dog whistle. Yeah, that'd be great, except it's not true. Anyway, getting back to Ukraine, for those of you who don't know, there were two different gatherings, peace accord gatherings, both up in Minsk, Belarus. It was called Minsk Accords 1 and Minsk Accords 2. The pro-Russian or Russian-speaking Ukrainians that lived in the east in the territory called the Donbass, they were the ones who had voted in Yanukovych along with the people of Crimea, who were, again, because of the Soviet relationships, mostly Russian speakers and Russian nationalists. They still had an allegiance to their country, Ukraine, but they also had sort of another, it's like being a Mexican American and having sort of a tie to the government of Mexico. Anyway, so there was a lot of fighting going on, and the nationalists, the same groups of people who perpetrated that coup I talked about in the Maidan, they were trying to forcibly integrate the more Russian-leaning, Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the East into the fabric of what they believed to be a Ukrainian nationalist approach to government. And that was the rub. The people in the East said, you took our leader out. That was illegitimate. And the people in the West said, F you, get with the program. No more Russian. You're Ukrainian first. Otherwise, you're an enemy. So what started to happen? The Ukrainian army started shelling residential areas indiscriminately in the territory to try to submit the people to the western part of Ukraine's desires, the central government backed by the United States. Why does the US give a shit about Ukraine? Because it's a very strategic asset to Russia. Russia wants a neutral Ukraine. It cannot afford to have its potential adversaries setting up shop on its doorstep. Makes sense, right? We wouldn't let the Chinese do that in Canada or Mexico. Why should they let it happen in Ukraine? Yes, it's a sovereign state. So is Cuba. But the U.S. has a blockade on Cuba. We're okay with that. So again, it's about applying the same standard. And John Mearsheimer, the political science professor, points all this out. And it's just common sense. You don't have to like it, but it's part of reality, big power politics. So Ukraine was used as a tool, a proxy, which was actually admitted to by Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, to try to degrade the Russian military by arming and fueling the conflict in Ukraine. And I believe that the U.S. government knew full well that if it kept pushing and making these peace accords fail, that the Russians would be forced to do something eventually. And they were, and they did. And I think they wanted this. And why do they want this? Well, one, it degrades the Russians. But when the U.S. procures weapons, who makes money? Does it go to Ukraine? Well, the weapons go there. But the money that is procured to pay for said weapons goes to U.S. weapons manufacturers. Who owns those companies? The richest 0.5% of all of us have like 65% of all those shares. They make unbelievable sums of money. And they charge outrageous markups because it's wartime and they can get away with it. This is pilfering from the Treasury. This is what Julian Assange said. You should look up this quote. He gave a quote before he got snagged and put in jail. He said, the purpose of war is not to win the war. The purpose of war is to perpetuate the war as long as possible, to wash money out of the tax bases of Western countries. Meaning, have money go on the credit card of the country, which is our bank account, our credit card statement. And who gets it? The rich people who own those shares. It's a wealth transfer mechanism, and people die. Now imagine if you're in an industry and you're going to make money, and you're a sick, sadistic MFer who doesn't care who dies, meaning all these Ukrainians, and you're going to make all this money. What kind of person would do that? And I call them the sociopathic serial accumulator class. Sociopathic serial accumulator. They're money hoarders who have a grave indifference to the suffering of others and of the planet itself. They are so addicted to accumulating money, and they're so focused on return on investment, that runs their life. It just becomes like an obsession. And the reason it becomes an obsession is because when you reach the $50 million mark playing this game, all you want to do is make it to 100. And when you make it to 100, all you want to do is get to 200 million. You're never satisfied. I call it chasing your shadow. Try going outside one day, sunny day, and jump towards your shadow and see what happens. You never land on it. It always ends up being a few feet to your right or left. That's just the way it is. These people are shadow jumpers. They are never satisfied. And their sociopathic pursuit of the dopamine they generate by chasing money and bragging at cocktail parties and golf rounds is what's driving all this crap. That's it. A bunch of sociopathic, mostly men and a few women that are taking all the money from everybody else, accumulating it, and creating a huge division that's going to break out into what I believe to be massive civil unrest in the next couple decades. Unfortunately. Now, listen, I wish it weren't the case. I wish there was. Now, listen, life in America right now still isn't horrific. People are sliding into economic, decline because of inflation, jobs being displaced by AI and robots and automation. And there's still a lot of good things about the country that are wonderful. But a lot of people are not experiencing that because they're just so overwhelmed by having to work 24/7 just to try to barely survive. And that's a shame because there's so much money being hoarded. Imagine going to a Thanksgiving banquet at a church, a large banquet hall with 1,000 people from church. And the first 5 people that get up go there with armed guards and they take 40% of the food off the banquet table. And they go to a corner, they're eating their one plate, and the rest of the food just sits there in the corner. Then you got the next 10 people that get up and they take half of what's left. And then the next 935 people go up and fight for what's left. That is the American economic system, folks. That's it. So what we have to do, which is really hard, is to tell those fuckers in the corner that shit's not okay, and we have to find a way to get through the armed guards. And let me put that in terms, the U.S. police forces and military are enforcement tools of property ownership by large high net worth individuals in these various Western quote unquote democracies. The political system is used as a barrier to changes that would otherwise shift these dynamics. Both parties are bought off. Everybody has the rewards and incentives that makes it impossible to buck the system where you just basically get squeezed out of office. So just by being practical and surviving politically, these things perpetuate. So if we vote in different puppets, different marionettes on the stage, how in the hell is it going to change the people holding the marionette strings? Those armed guards in the corner. It's not. That's why it's all a big pageant. George Carlin said, the reason we have elections is to give the public the illusion that we have a choice. He says, you don't. You have no choice. These people own you. They own you. They don't give a fuck about you. That's what's going on. Now, if you're in the managerial class, you're making, let's say, a mid-6-figure salary, or you're bringing down enough money to kind of make it through the ringer, good for you. The inflation is not going to totally twist you up. And I'm in a neighborhood right now that has a lot of those people, old money. They have stock portfolios of probably 10 to 15 million. They have $1 million homes. They're going to be insulated from this. But for every one of them, there are 250 to 300,000 other people that don't have any of that. And there are probably another 50,000 on top of that have almost nothing, that live in these low-income pockets, whether it's West Virginia or urban America with shitty schools and massive crime. I don't mean to focus just on the negative, but these are the headwinds that we have to deal with. And all this shit, I believe, is going to explode. Just like the Palestinians, they sit under this pressure cooker of despair. And what happens is eventually people they can't take it anymore and things just burst. And so I think something like that is definitely on the horizon, although maybe not in the shorter term, but I think it's coming. So we got a guest up here. Sorry, I've been talking so goddamn long. Okay, we have Kusama Rus, I guess. Sorry if I messed your name up. Somebody says stop talking. Hey, listen, you don't have to. You can swipe the fuck on, as Twin likes to say. I think a lot of people actually enjoy this, quite frankly. Okay, the person's also timing out. You're timing out, Kasam. If you want to get back in, the best thing to do is to leave TikTok, restart your internet, and then come on back in and re-request. That should fix it. Okay? Now, let's talk about it for a second because, people always will say, well, hey, smart guy, you're talking about the problem, but what about the solution? Anybody can point out the problem. Okay, let's talk about that. So we all know the example of people who work in a company. Let's say you have a company that has 5,000 employees. And we know companies right now are making record profits, right? They're increasing their profit margins by overcharging because they can. So part of it is shrinkflation, where they make smaller packages and charge the same, or they're upping their prices, or both. And we're paying it. And the companies have record profits right now. You're like, well, that's not right. They should be giving us a break. No, they don't. These are greedy fucks. Same group of serial accumulators, same people. So what does that mean for the future? Well, it means that we're going the other way. We're not going to be part of the benefit of the future. Now, if you're somebody who is in charge of this stuff, what do you want to do to make sure that the pressure cooker doesn't blow up. You want to have that lid nice and secure, right? So the shit doesn't blow up, right? You want to put latches on the lid. Right now we have a lid that's above us, but it hasn't completely latched down yet. However, those latches are in the works. And I don't want to get into too many details, but things like central bank digital currencies, geofencing, biometrics, and of course, what we saw happen in 2019, I believe is all part and parcel to some of those clamps that will eventually come down on the top. But they're not there yet. So there's technically still time to work our way outside the container we're in and get to those clamps before they come on us. But most people aren't even aware they're in the pot. And that's the problem. That's why it's our job to talk about the pot and explain this shit to people. So what can the public do to get rid of these clamps? What can happen? Well, first of all, we'll say this. It's not easy. I'm not going to kick her out, Amanda. Let her say what she wants. Nothing bothers me. Unless she's saying something offensive to you all, that's, Okay, so let's talk about it. So first of all, let's talk about third-party candidates. Okay, it would be marvelous if somebody who has integrity like Cornel West or Jill Stein or anybody else who has some courage and has some altruism to want to help the general public that can get into office. Guess what? Guess who's going to make sure that never happens? The establishment. They are never going to let somebody get nominated. They won't even let them debate on the stage. They make it impossible for them to get enough signatures. Diane Sayre, who's an independent candidate for Senate in New York, she's going through the signatures. She has to get 60,000 signatures in like 6 weeks. You know how hard that is? It's very hard. So they make all these obstacles to make it impossible. But even if you somehow miraculously make it through that maze, they have the party system that look what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2016. He had a lead on Hillary Clinton, who was the darling of the establishment. She was all the people, all the money being given to her. And they basically railroaded Bernie right out of the primary. So if that happened to Bernie Sanders, who's been in the government and been in the mix for what, 30 years, what do you think would happen to an outsider like Jill Stein? Right? What would happen to Jill Stein? So again, I'm not saying this because I want to just point out all the obstacles. I would love to see someone like Jill. I've met Jill. I like Jill. I've met Cornel West. I like Cornel West a lot. But it's just not practical. We have to be practical about this. The stranglehold that this serial accumulator, transnational oligarchy, and these different interest groups and the national security apparatus have on the government is absolute. And they have the political system tied up in a bow. So how can we change those dynamics? Well, we could do a constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendment could change the money in politics, which could potentially change some of these influences that we're seeing that are disproportionately favoring the wealthy class. So what does that require? Well, it requires either a 2/3 vote of the Congress and the Senate signed by the president, or 3/4 of the state legislatures ratify it. So if you're the wealthy class and you're a special interest group, and the last thing you want is the money in politics thing to change because it's what allows you to have your way, what are you going to do knowing that dynamic? You're going to make sure you have enough money given to both representatives from both parties and both senators. You're going to make sure the presidency is in your hands so they can't sign shit. And you're going to get the state legislatures in your pocket. That's what they've done. They have taken their lobbying efforts and their money system and expanded it to such an extent that it's like the tentacles of an octopus or a squid. It is strangling everything in sight. And why is that? Because they know that's going to keep them from having to be accountable. The people do not have a legal, legitimate path to affect change. And people say, well, if we just get enough right people in it, no. Because if you understand how the party system works, the only way you move ahead in positions of power in the party is if you raise a lot of money and if you play by the book. You play within the party rules. You kiss ass, you vote for the right things. So that you spend half your time raising money. Who are you raising it from? Me and you? Nope. They're raising money from the richest people on the planet. What do those people want? More of the same. So if you raise money from them this cycle and then you vote for something that's against their interests, like taxation, when you call them back next year, well, guess what's going to happen? No money. Right? And if you don't get the money, you don't get reelected. And the people that raise the most money get rewarded the most by the party, and they give them more money, more super PAC money. It's this insidious, repeatable cycle that is non-breakable. It has reached a point where it's irreparably broken, in my opinion. So if that's blocked off, and the state houses are blocked off, and the president is co-opted by the rich, What in the hell are we? What the hell can we do? What in the hell can we do? Well, we talked about a company, and we have companies right now that are making record profits. If you don't know, UPS, United Parcel Service, just went through this process about a year ago. Their workers and their union had pointed out that the company was making record profits. They were making like $2.8 billion a month or something. And the workers didn't get a raise, not a goddamn penny. So they came together and said, hey, we're working 80-hour weeks, pulling all this time, and you're giving us nothing in return. Here's what we want. Here's a set of requests, right? A set of demands. Now, what did it require to create a union? The union wasn't always there. The union had to be organized. You had to go talk to workers and say, hey, if we have us together, we're stronger than if we're apart. But it's going to cost you some money out of your paycheck because we have to have money to pay for the union and we have to have money to pay for what's called a strike fund. And obviously, if you're a worker and you're only getting paid, let's say $14 an hour at the time, and they want to take $3 an hour out of your paycheck, that's a tough decision, right? But eventually, they got enough workers to create critical mass, which is very important, such that when they approached management with a set of demands, they had a viable threat to back it up of striking, which management could not ignore. And that happened. UPS would not relent on the bargaining, the management. So the union said, okay, we're going to go on strike. And the day before the strike, they accepted their terms and paid them. Because they realized that to go through the strike would be more costly to losing customers to FedEx and DHL and costing the corporate shareholders money. And so, yes, the corporation took a little less, had to lower their dividend to their investors to absorb the extra labor costs. But they did that because in aggregate, they're still making more money. So now you understand. That's the model. So it's pressure through organizing. Now, I know somebody who's a union organizer. It's hard work. First of all, most companies, when they catch wind of you doing that work, if they find out that an external union is coming in, they do whatever they can to thwart the effort. Starbucks is a great example. I say Walmart is the best example. They have threatened that if a union, either an employee or an outside union, tries to come in and organize the union, and they'll close the damn store down. Just shut the whole store down. Every employee loses their job. So knowing that, they made that public knowledge. That puts the fear into the worker. They're not going to lose $3 an hour to the union. They're going to lose their job. So that creates a chilling event. The National Labor Relations Board, which is supposed to regulate this shit, is populated by cronies, the same fuckers who take the money from the greedy class and do their bidding. You see, it's all about the same problem. It's always the same shit. You got a revolving door where someone will serve in government for 4 years with a beautiful promise of a board seat as long as they play ball, and vice versa. And they go in and out, and they always do the same shit to benefit corporations over people. See, are you seeing a pattern? So organization is key. Now, if you replaced the management of a corporation who's being greedy with the governing apparatus, the real power structure that runs this shit, is your high net worth individuals, your large corporations, your interest groups for industry, your country interest groups, your other special interests, the national security state and the war machine, the intelligence services, all that stuff creates a similar minded power structure that, just like the clamps on that pot I talked about, have to be, and the guards in the corner with the food from the banquet, they have to be displaced. They are the people holding the strings of the marionette. They're very powerful. And it's probably not likely that it will happen, even if people make the best of efforts. They're like the Walmarts. They are going to snuff out anything and everything that even starts to hint at some sort of a change in the status quo, in my opinion. Now, having said all that, we shouldn't be discouraged and lose hope, because there's always a chance for something to happen. But we have to first educate people and let them know that voting alone, although it's not an unimportant thing to do because it does affect some issues, it really affects who gets to be the main criminals for 2 or 4 years or 6 years, who gets to get the bribes and the payoffs and all the benefits later from the board seats, etc. But notwithstanding that, there are some issues like women's health and education and drug policy that do get affected by different administrations. But most of the core issues we've been discussing change very little from administration to administration. We're always fighting wars. Money's always being transferred out of the treasury to rich people. They always come up with a different calamity to take money from the ringer, put us in charge of paying it back, and the rich go running off to their islands or private yachts and their getaway bunkers. It's fucked up. So we got to get into the banquet hall. We got to tell people there is a banquet hall. We got to point to the armed guards and we got to say, don't yell at your neighbors across the way with the Democrat and Republican tables in the banquet hall. Look at the fucking armed guards in the corner. They're our enemy, not who's going to go up to get the meal of the 950 people that are being marginalized and having to eat the crumbs. And that's the problem right now. If you go on TikTok and you go to see some of these lives that are going on, everyone's angry at each other. Like, you're an idiot. Oh, you're a Trumper. Trump's a criminal. Biden's a fucking idiot. They're so distracted. We have NFL football, Netflix, smartphones. Everyone is busy chasing their tail, not focusing on the big picture. And this serves the status quo. They are loving life because guess what? They're richer than ever. They pay less taxes than ever, and everything's going their way. They're about to create a huge change in cost of labor through automation. That's going to mean less and less jobs for people. And guess what? They don't give a shit. If you and I don't have a job and we don't have an income, guess what? They don't give a fuck. They don't care. It's not their problem. That's the government's problem. They see it. So they want the government to use the treasury, just like Walmart does. They underpay their people, and then people have to go get welfare. They're going to start putting that stuff on the backs of the taxpayer. So that you and I, the credit card bill starts to swell to give people basic income because the jobs are being decimated by these corporations. We've seen it with overseas, moving stuff overseas. That happened with China. All the labor went from the United States and factories to China. That was stage one. Stage two is AI, automation, robotics, etc. It's coming, folks. We're already seeing it. So somebody just said in the comments, why aren't you starting the revolution? Listen, first of all, let's put it this way. One is, it's risky for anybody to even start, talking about implementation of this stuff. Let's face it, like I said, the Walmart approach is the status quo. These people are ruthless. If somebody like me started going out on the corner and holding a sign up saying, we need to overthrow the government, what the fuck's going to happen? I'm going to be put in jail, Julian Assange style, never let out. What's going to have to happen is the awareness is going to have to grow about the problem first. The tactics and the end goals are something that has to be discussed at some point, just like the union does. But the first stage is to organize and realize that separately we have no power, together we have some power. That's it. Which is hard to do given the current dynamics. People are angry, distracted, and fighting amongst each other, right? That's it. So the other thing human beings can do, and one thing that people do if they're striking, they go out on a picket line. They make themselves publicly visible. Right? They will picket outside of the factory. Well, we know about protesting, right? We have protests that go on in DC and elsewhere, and sometimes they're pretty big, but they need to be bigger. Something called civil disobedience is often required for this. Like when the people fighting for civil rights were marching across the Pettus Bridge in Alabama, they were breaking the law. They were blocking a bridge. They were blocking traffic. This happened in San Francisco at the Golden Gate Bridge recently about Gaza. A bunch of people blocked the bridge. There was no traffic at rush hour in San Francisco across the bridge, which is unheard of. So, blocking the arteries of commerce potentially, in addition to organizing, withholding payment of taxes, if you choose to, that's part of the mix, and or not buying anything but absolute essentials, which starves out the corporations that require consumption. None of this will work at a small scale, as we're seeing now. But if you have critical mass, just like the union example, if we have 120 million people, or even 50 million, that are doing this, it will have a huge impact. And just like the corporate management, who doesn't want the train to stop moving because it costs them a ton of money, there may be a chance for some of these things to be relented on. Maybe there can be some reasonable modifications absent some of this stuff. I would hope so. But again, I don't think it's going to happen. I'm obviously not the only person to think about this stuff. It's been on my mind for many decades, but other people see it. And I don't believe that. You'll see. Just wait till you see what happens in 2024. You'll see. People get elected, same shit's going to keep happening because that's what happened before. Same shit's going to keep happening. Trump's not going to take over the government. He's not going to become some sort of autocrat. That's a bunch of bullshit, Democrat fear tactic bullshit. Not going to happen. So don't worry about that. But what is going to happen is that the oligarchy is going to squeeze more and more out of the population. So if you want to make a difference in the world, start talking about this stuff with people. This is what's going to make the difference. Somebody says, so I'm voting for Trump. I don't vote for any federal office. It's a total waste of time, in my opinion. I don't really care because they do the same shit either way. They're equally bought off by the same interests. So people are just like listen, what did George Carlin say? The elections exist to give people the illusion of choice. We have no choice. They own us. They do what they want regardless of who gets into office. Look at AIPAC. Do you think AIPAC cares who gets elected? They pummel people into submission if they don't do their bidding. Not going along with AIPAC is political suicide in this country. So you can do it. You can stand on your principles. Guess what happens? You're a one-term congressman, senator, whatever. That's it. We have examples of that in the recent past. There have been actually Jewish members of Congress who have stood up against the occupation and Israel's funding, and they got knocked out. Lost by 20 points in the last election. 20 points. That's a huge margin of victory for someone who won the previous election. AIPAC has tons of cash. And it's not so much the campaign donations that they give the individuals, it's the money they use during the election through super PACs. They buy all the ads, pay for all the campaign canvassing, all the phone calls, all that bullshit. And it works. Ruby's doing great. Ruby, say hi. Ruby. Ruby, say hi. There you go, baby. There she is. So this. I hate to say this. I would rather be able to tell you guys it's all roses and ice cream, but this is quote unquote what the U.S. public is up against, and the Western world. So not exclusive to the same things in the UK, although not quite as bad. So I don't know. Listen, like any country, you got to remember that. What does the Constitution say? Every person who swears an allegiance to the Constitution, whether you're in the military, the police, or any other position of public service, you are swearing to defend the United States Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I would argue that the systems of power that have developed, the way they've insidiously created this system of block and control, are domestic enemies of the U.S. Constitution. That's my argument. So if you disagree with that, come on up and talk about it. But think of it this way. Has your life gotten better in any measurable way in the last 8 or 10 years? And also a good thing to look at is measure your life in terms of, the things that you feel like you should be working through as of 2024, and then track it through 2028. Some sort of measurable benchmark. You will see, for most people, maybe not yourself, that most people are going to be moving in what they believe to be the wrong direction. Because the American dream of the middle class, if there ever was one, is gone. It doesn't exist. The expenses to buy a house, to own a car, to get a good education, to have health care, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Now, are there still good things here? Absolutely. And we have freedom. If you can figure out a way to make it work financially, you can have a pretty good life here. We do have a great infrastructure of roads and stuff, although it needs work. We have a legal system that allows you to, deal with things in a way that's not total anarchy. But all that, I believe, is crumbling in real time. It's just people can't quite feel it. It's almost like, when you eat bad food and smoke and drink for many decades, and you say, my uncle so-and-so lived till, we're that uncle so-and-so right now. We're getting away with it, but we're getting to the point where it all starts to catch up. The money printing becomes hyperinflation. That is disastrous for our country. And we have adversaries right now that are shifting away from us economically, the BRICS countries, and they are doing a fine job of attracting people away from the U.S. orbit of influence. Why? Because the U.S. has used its position of hegemony and supremacy to basically whip people into submission. And if they won't go into submission, they take them out. This is the U.S. empire. This is the game. If you're someone who's been bullied, African nation, been bullied by France, bullied by the U.S. for decades, threatened, have your loans, called in, and they take certain resources from your country because you can't pay your loans back, or you have, dictators that ran off with the money and now the country owes the debt, and they do what's called structural adjustments. If you've been getting hammered and browbeaten for decades by a hegemonic power, and someone else comes up to you and says, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll clear your debt. Let us do some bridges and roads in your country. Let's work together and they're going to say, fuck yeah. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So the old colonial model, the economic colonialism, is fragmenting quickly and badly for the Western powers. That's why the U.S. is fighting so hard. It's like a ship that's going down, and they just have everybody on the side bailing out water right now, and aggressively going after whatever we can get as the ship turns. That's what's happening. Go study Ray Dalio about how different empires emerge and fall. We're in the late stage of empire, late stage of capitalism. We're on the downslope. My mother, who's almost 80, born in 1945, she caught the entire upslope. All of the economic boom, all of the benefits of hegemony, having this reserve currency, having military supremacy. She caught every benefit. And she's a boomer and she's well to do. She's got a house paid off, tons of money in the bank, big stock portfolio, great health care, blah, blah, blah. Her needs are met. But that's not the same for us, our generation. It's certainly not my sister's kids. They're fucked. They're absolutely fucked. Yeah, you got to come in, Samuel. You got to come into the guest box to join them. I can't do that for you. What you do is there's a little blue and red button just right of center. You tap that and then you hit request. And then I can bring you up. Listen, no, this is the other thing. People say, well, gosh, with all this negativity, how can you make it through the day? I've come to terms with this stuff a long time ago. I kind of look at it like this, okay? When you get a diagnosis of terminal cancer, initially it's like a huge gut punch, like your whole life is like upside down. In my learning all this, I've been through that anguish. I've been through like, what the fuck, how can we get past this? And the chance that it's ever gonna change. It's probably not. I mean, it'd be great if it would. I'd be the most excited person, but let's face it, it's probably not gonna happen. It's a very high mountain to climb. I can mope around about it, but I don't feel any negative emotion around it anymore. I accept it for what it is. I'm trying to live the best I can despite it, and whatever happens, happens. That's where I am with it. I've kind of accepted it. I think that happens with people who are terminally ill. They finally reach a point where they can just kind of let it go and try to live the best they can. That's all you can do. So living in total, fear and concern, I can't change it individually. I can talk to people like you about it, which is, I think, our job is to speak about it first, because awareness is the first step of anything that might happen. And that's what I'm doing. So yeah, we have a guest. I think it's Samuel. And again, if you think I'm crazy, you're not going to offend me by telling me you think I'm totally wrong. I would love it if I was wrong about this shit.
Yeah, am I talking now?
You're on. We can hear you.
Right on. Hey, I don't know who you are, but we're reading the same email. And down the road, and that's why I was hitting you so hard to say, can I join? Because
Well, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what part of the world are you from, and what's your background?
I actually graduated from Simpsonville. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, went to my high school.
Cool.
So I grew up in Portland, Oregon. The world of Simpsons is actually built around that high school. A lot of the characters are drawn from teachers that I had, Mr. Folks, Dr. Lacey, Jack Ryan. Anyway, that's just sort of fun. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so left coast, and I have spent a lot of time in the protest movement. And I am primarily self-educated, so I don't speak as articulately as you, but my self-directed activities and research and experience in life has led me to the same destination as you. So snaps and agreement. And what you concluded with just before you invited me on is exactly why I'm on TikTok, is because I think that you're absolutely right, is that we have to teach each other. We have to learn from each other. We have to challenge our own preconceptions. And I call that decolonizing one's own mind, because we are living in a corporate-owned colonial environment. It is exactly the joint stock companies that started this country. The illusion of freedom was built on the backs of enslaved people. So white people had the illusion of freedom because they weren't black or First Nations. And who was it? Lyndon Johnson said that all that you have to do is to convince a white man that he's better than the best black man, and he will give you his money.
I hadn't heard that before.
kind of famous. Anyway, there were a number of questions as you were talking, and they just kind of come and then they go. And so the questions end up getting fragmented.
Okay, well, just go ahead and do best you can, just whatever you want to talk about.
A lot of it is like sort of deconstruction, like you're doing. And when you're talking about the hegemony of the corporate interests directing the political affairs of the United States to the exclusion of the citizens who are supposed to be sovereign in this country, I guess I'm trying to formulate this question because, something to the point of what's the end game? Because if you don't have the slave class to serve wealth, then the wealth is meaningless. If you don't have a class to lord the wealth over, the wealth is meaningless. So ultimately, I see a couple of different problems. So when you're talking about basically fascism being forced on the population and population reduction in order to manage, because there is no way that the United States could sustain a war outside and civil unrest within the country.
Yeah, that's true.
So
especially a multi-front war.
right, and so that's what they're setting up. So, and this will lead to one question. So, how do you think? Because war is always hardship for the population that is forced to support the war. So the population in the United States is already suffering hardships. How could we endure a greater hardship of an external war?
Well, remember that when things coalesce around a foreign enemy, a common enemy tends to bring people together. Look what happened here in 9/11. The public was, quote unquote, working together more than ever. They were sort of like put aside their differences to come together for the country's common good. That unity and that sort of nationalism gets promoted beyond any level of perceivable propaganda. It's going to be absolutely absurd. So whatever incident does stir this up, like Pearl Harbor or whatever it may be, it's going to be presented like it was with the Iraq War. Weapons of mass destruction. They drum up the necessity for national security. Blah 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 blah. And that's the average person. Believe it or not, this is not because they're stupid. They just don't know any better. They're used to playing into the game, the structure that they believe in. I have family members that they're not stupid people. They're very smart, well-educated people. They completely buy into the system. They believe what they hear on MSNBC. They believe the government's description of all these different foreign conflicts. They just accept it. They don't have any reason to question it. And for a lot of people, that's the reality for most people in America and in the West.
Absolutely, and this is why we have to share this information and help people engage. And you've seen what's happened with TikTok. And even myself, as much as I've tried to educate myself over decades, the knowledge that I've gained in the last 6 months about what Israel actually represents and the occupation. I didn't realize how that was like a drain hole in the boat of America. It's just sucking wealth out of us.
Well, it's not so much that. The percentage of dollars that comes out for supporting Israel is not vast in terms of our budget. But what is vast is the inordinate influence that the forces that drive that allocation of money as well as military, but more so at the UN. That's been the biggest game changer. The fact that Zionism and support for Israel has run the show since forever, and there's no accountability for Israel because of that at the UN level. No international curbs on imperial power. Let's countries do what they're doing right now. It's permissible for them to brutalize their neighbor any way they want because they have no repercussions.
So the Reichstag fire was in February, I think it was the 23rd, and Dachau opened up 3 weeks later for its first guests. And that's how quickly things can shift. And this is something that's really frightening because all of the rhetoric that we've heard from a certain guy with orange hair has been the people that he has problems with. And they're the same candidates that were drawn into Dachau. Intellectuals, writers, critics, journalists, politicians, lawyers, political enemies.
Well, in fairness, I mean, I understand your point of being concerned about that. I would humbly suggest that that's not the primary concern. I don't believe any of the concerns about Donald Trump in terms of fascism and takeover and ending of elections and all that stuff. It's just a bunch of bunk. It's fear tactics to scare the population back into the establishment. Trump, to some extent, economically, is just as establishment as anybody. He's played the same game as every other wealthy person has. In fact, even more so because he's used the bankruptcy system to make his wealth. He didn't like do it on his own. He's not a very good business guy. But you remember, he is still subject to the same bookends as any other, quote, elected official, I would call pre-selected official. No different.
So you don't give any credence to the 2025 project?
Not at all. I think it's a bunch of bullshit. I believe that there's a concerted effort to increase profits. And the reason why people I don't think are going to be mass unalived is because to whatever extent they need consumption to fuel profitability, they will have that many people doing consumption. As long as the profit levels grow, that's how they will structure society accordingly. Whatever they can to avoid disruption and maintain profitability is the layout that will be maintained.
Here's the difficulty, and this is just the other side of the coin, is that if the United States can't sustain an outside war and an internal unrest, then what would stop whatever, I mean, we're in a political corporate system, right? Fascism. So what would stop an emergency order to collect up all of the dissenters and the protesters and the anti-American
Good point.
people?
Nothing will. That's the point. I think that something like that is more likely to happen than not.
Because, like you said, there's always going to be that ignorant, ultra-patriot people that just trust the government and they say, I'm all in there, and if these people got to go, they're a threat to the United States.
Well, the other thing that's concerning right now, and people have talked about the immigration that's going on right now, a lot of military-age men from a lot of places around the world are coming through Mexico and pouring into the United States. I think it's over 1.4 million now. And remember this, now, if you're in the National Guard and you're in the police force, or state police, local police, and there's any kind of resistance, uprising, dissent in your town, you're not likely, if you see your cousin and your neighbors and the guy you played softball with in high school or whatever, to take up arms against that person, right? You're going to have a second thought. But if the military and police forces are giving incentives to people who are pouring into the country to get them naturalized, as long as they serve in the military, the police force, whatever it may be, well, they're not going to have a second. You might want to keep that noise down if you can in the background.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. You might want to think. You're not going to think twice about enforcing the rules that you're being paid to enforce, right?
Right, because you don't have any identification with those people.
You could give a shit about the people. They're not your homies. So I believe that is a big part of that influx of people. There's something to do with that.
Well, the greatest threat that I can see.
Can you come closer to your phone? It's kind of hard to hear you. You're kind of distant.
It's a headset. Let me see if I can find a different one.
Just if you don't have the ability to talk right now because you have other things you have to do, that's understandable. We can let you come back later when you can be a little more to the phone or whatever it is.
Yeah, sure. If you want me to jump off, or do you want to?
Well, it's whatever you have to do. If you can do the talking, we can do that. Or if you have to go do other stuff while you do it, we can talk later. It's
Yeah,
up to you.
I'm just you caught me right while I was cooking dinner, and I jumped on just as I was finishing up. So,
Well, no
uh,
worries. If you have to deal with that, we can get back on when you're done with all that stuff. If
okay,
that works better for you. Okay.
sure.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Cheers.
I appreciate it. Yeah, interesting points. Who knows where this is all going to go? If a lot of this stuff, my best hope is that a lot of this stuff turns out to be a nothing burger. But again, if the status quo continues as it is, it's just like what's happening in Israel Palestine, very similar. It's going to continue to go slowly but steadily in the wrong direction if you're Palestinian. Because what's happened before? That's been the trajectory before, right? What's going to change that trajectory at this point? Yes, world opinion is shifting, but does the shifting of opinion alone have enough impact to influence the current insulation and power systems that are protecting Israel from accountability? I think the answer to that is unfortunately no, as much as I would like it to be otherwise. Now, I've been criticized for saying that. A lot of people who are pro Palestinian, who are Palestinian here on TikTok, they're so angered, which I think rightly so, by what they're seeing, that they believe that just by the conversations and the changing of the thought processes, that's going to shift the dynamics. I wish that were the case, but I just don't see how. Just like I don't see the country right now putting aside its petty differences here at home, stopping the distractions, figuring out the real problem, organizing, doing the hard work, taking the risks, enduring the hardships, and overcoming the power structure. I don't think the odds are high of that, if at all. And if anybody disagrees with that, I want to hear your not that I want it to be that way. I would much rather see. I'd be the first person to say, "Let's go," but I just don't think many people right now are of that mindset. Somebody says, "Can you become Zionist?" Are you asking that as a general question, or are you directing that to me? That's by ML91. Anyone can say they're Zionists. In fact, there are more Christian evangelical Zionists than there are Jewish Zionists in the world. There's 23 million Christian Zionists in the United States, and there's only about 15.5 million Jewish people worldwide, and among them, not all are Zionists. Many are, but not all. So interesting. But if you're asking me if I will become a Zionist, no, the answer to that is no way, not ever. I will never become a pro-Zionist person, not because it has anything to do with Jewish people, although many people who are Zionist in that region are Jewish, but it's because of the thought process. It's the mentality that I don't like. And let me give you an example of it. It's not just the establishment of a Jewish ethno state, which a lot of people think that that's all Zionism. If I believed that's what it was, I wouldn't even talk about it. I believe that Zionism is much more incorporates much more sinister factors than just the establishment of the ethno state. It is a continuing mentality of expansion and marginalization of the neighbors for land acquisition that it rightfully believes that who are Zionists believe it's theirs because God ordained them as the special people. That accompanies Zionism. If you read the Talmud, it doesn't talk specifically about a nation state, but the mentality is reinforced because non-Jews or goyim are considered to be no better than slaves for Jewish people. Read the Talmud. That's what it says. So there's no way in hell I'd ever be a Zionist. I mean, not in a trillion years. I don't, you can come up to me and say, "We'll give you $10 billion if you say," I wouldn't do it. I don't want your goddamn money. Which would be great to have $10 billion, by the way, but I just can't. No, there's no way. I mean, if the behavior were different, if the mindset and behavior were different, sure, I would support safety for Jewish people. I think that's a great goal, but not the way it's being carried out. It's disgusting to me. It's everything about the human condition I despise. Selfish, self-centered, narcissistic, indifferent to the suffering of others, superiority complex, the whole nine yards. And not every Zionist embodies all those traits, but unfortunately, the ones that are driving the train have them in droves. Clearly. Well, listen, you can make that comment, but I disagree. I think being a Zionist is downright evil, and I believe that some of the worst forces in the world stem from Zionism. But like I said, I'm not opposed to the idea of a safe location for Jewish people to be free from harm, because there has been historical instances where clearly that is required, it's needed. But there are members who study the Torah, the Natural Kai people, that say that the establishment of a Jewish state prior to the arrival of the Messiah is against their beliefs as Jews. So I know people say they're radicals or they're like fundamentalists, but that's what the book says. So the aspirations to establish a Jewish state is not condoned by the very religious text upon which Judaism is based. So there you go. And by the way, most people who are Zionists, especially those in Israel, are atheists. The founders of Zionism, Theodor Herzl and carried on by Chaim Weizmann and others, they're atheists. They have no belief in God. Their only tie is the only reason they use God is because they know it was said in some of the text that the land belonged to the Jews. And so therefore they co-opted the story to justify the colonization and land theft in Palestine. Period, full stop, end of story. That's why I don't like Zionism. It's not so much that its goals were horrible, but it's what they were willing to do to achieve them in terms of harming others. And again, it's like anything else in life. If you wanted to have a better job, would you go and take somebody's car and kill them to have that job? I wouldn't. But that's basically what Zionists did. They wanted what they wanted. They schemed to get it. They used money and influence and power and terrorism to create a framework within which they could get what they wanted at the expense of whomever else, and fuck them. In my mind, that's a very sociopathic way of being. And I don't believe in sociopath. I think it's disgusting. That's my take on that. Same thing with the European colonists here in the United States. Same exact sociopathic, selfish, narcissistic, we're entitled to it, manifest destiny bullshit. And yeah, I know I'm sitting here in the same places where the natives were, 500 years ago or 300 years, whatever it was. Yeah, it sucks. And just because I'm here now and I can't change what happened, I don't like it, and it's still as wrong as what's going on right now in Palestine. Doesn't ever make it right. Just because it's happened elsewhere, that doesn't validate what Zionism is attempting to do. Somebody says, just say you're anti-Semitic. It'll save you a lot of breath and our time. Listen, you can call me whatever you want if you want to make that allegation. I can tell you lock, stock, and barrel. Let me give you an example, okay? One of my really good friends here is Jewish. He comes from a very tight-knit Orthodox Jewish community here that's very, very tight-knit. He got into some real trouble, some big-time trouble, legally. So what I did for him was I stopped everything I was doing. He got arrested. He had to go to jail. He had to have somebody handle his bail money. I spent 2 full days, no expectation for anything, to just help him along with the process. Because he's a guy he's been very kind to me. I've met his family. I've spent time with his kids. He has 6 beautiful kids. I love his family. They're nice people. And he needed the help. So my mind is when somebody's kind to you and you want to maintain the same golden rule of being kind to others, you're kind to them and you help them in their time of need. People have done that for me, which I really appreciate. So that's what I did. Now, if I hated Jewish people, I would have said someone to go fuck himself. Fuck you, you know what? That just doesn't enter my mind. So the same thing goes for this situation. If you were to, by the way, this is just to clarify that for you. And I've done videos about this, but I'll just repeat it. If the players were reversed here, let's just take an example where, for whatever reason, there was a vast, large Jewish population, and there was this very small ethnic Arab state that got carved out because of whatever agreements took place in this same region where Jewish people had lived with some Arabs for some time. But they carved out an Arab state and forced Jews off their land. So all these Jewish people became displaced from their land. And some scattered to other Jewish nations, but most of them stayed in the territories where they could go, but they became refugees. So they were a lot were unalived in the process. Now, I would criticize, I'd be happy that the Arab population had a safe place to go that was granted to them. But I would not like the expense that it caused to the Jewish people in the process of its creation. Now, that has nothing to do with the ethnicity or religion. It's about the power dynamics and the situational issues. Does that make sense to you? So it's not about Judaism. It's about who fucked over who in what way, at what time, and who's continued to fuck over who in what way and what time. That makes sense. If someone wasn't fucking somebody over, I would have nothing to say about it. Now, you can find a way to justify the fucking people over by saying it's for your team, and because you want what you want, you're going to do it and fuck them. Okay, that's an argument. I think it's a bullshit argument. That's why I call it out. Okay, so it has nothing to do with Judaism, Jewishness. I understand why the Russians did what they did. I'm not pro-Russian. I'm not pro-Russian Christian nationalism, but I understand why the Russians did what they did in Ukraine. I don't hate Ukrainians. I'm not against, Slavic languages or whatever. I can give a shit. It's about the power. That's what geopolitics is. It's about the power dynamics. Aviram, when you say, what do you know about the Zionist movement? Well, for those of you who don't know, The concept of Zionism was started by a guy named Theodor Herzl in the late 1800s. And he had a lot of writings. You can go look them up and read them. And they were thinking about establishing a Jewish homeland. And there were several regions that initially were in the thought process for potential homeland for Jews. One area was in South America, Argentina. Another one was in Africa, East Africa, and Uganda. And also, I believe there was one other place considered, which escapes me right now. But ultimately, it was decided upon because of the reasons I mentioned earlier about the biblical connections and the rationale that the Jews had a tie to the land, and that would attract more Jews to the region to fill the state up and have it have some legitimacy, was to establishment in historic Palestine. And once that decision was made, then the work began. And Herzl, who passed the baton on to Chaim Weizmann and others, sought out funding and assistance from well-to-do business people, mainly the Rothschild family, and used the power and influence to deal with elected officials, the British, try to cajole them. A lot of the British establishment did not want to grant a homeland to the Jews in that territory because they knew what kind of trouble it would cause. Any person with half a brain would know that when you forcibly implement a Jewish ethno-state in a majority Arab-populated region, it's going to cause trouble. Duh. So they cajoled, they paid off certain officials, they cajoled, they bought some land, they convinced the United States to back it at the UN, the nascent UN, and that's what happened. Now, there are different people in the Zionist movement. There's some that are very hardcore, but they believe in what's called the Greater Israel or the Eretz Israel Project. They believe that all the land, according to their interpretation of God's granting them this land that extends from the Nile River in the east, all the way over, or into the west, I guess, or to the south, all the way over to include all of Lebanon, most of Syria, half of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, and of course, historic Palestine, including Gaza and the West Bank, or what they call Judea and Samaria. That's what they believe is their land, and they think that that's what they're going to obtain. They're going to extend their borders and their control of territory to those ends. Now, in my mind, that's absolutely insane. And I think a lot of people who support the state of Israel also think that's insane because it is. It's going to cause a lot of war. But the problem I have with Zionism is not the establishment of a safe homeland for Jewish people. I have no beef with that, whatever. I think most decent people wouldn't. Who would? It's what's happened as a part of it. It's the dastardly things that went on, the harm that was caused to others, and the harm that continues to be caused to others as a part of the maintenance of the concept of Zionism, along with the supremacy concept that comes with it, and all the attitude of being God's chosen people. I think that's bullshit. Okay, so that's what Zionism is. And Zionism is a very selfish, self-centered, sort of narcissistic superiority complex way of seeing the world, where you think the Jews are the chosen people and it justifies whatever bullshit goes on. And I don't like that. I don't like anybody who thinks that way, whether they're a Western European colonialist, an American colonialist, or a Jewish supremacist. It all makes me sick in my stomach. Samuel Lee as a guest. Come on, Ruby. Come on, baby. Samuel, are you there?
Yeah, just a second. I just changed headsets.
No worries. Welcome to the Fun and Games.
I'm trying to get hooked up here. So
We can hear you fine. I don't know if you want to stick with what you got. And listen, I know that people who support Israel and Zionism get angry when people frame it this way. They see it differently. They think they're literally, this is a return, this is a removal of what they believe to be Arab colonists, and this is a return to their homeland is rightfully theirs because it was taken from them by different groups, including the Romans who expelled the Jews from Palestine 1,000 years ago and changed the name, the territory, which obviously angered them. So they feel like this is just a return to their normalcy. I get that explanation. I understand it. I just disagree with it. Because look who's had to suffer as a part of that framing. Look who had to suffer. Imagine if you're on the other side of what has been done related to Zionism and the creation of Israel. Just imagine for a second being on the other side of that issue. How would you feel? We have historic examples of Jews being horribly mistreated, and I think we should condemn that. What happened in World War II being the most horrific chapter, and we should all condemn that. Should we condemn the members of the Warsaw Ghetto who pushed back against their German oppressors and tried to escape or fight back? I don't. But for some reason, when you have people that you've taken their land and they want to fight back to try to have autonomy, you condemn them as terrorists. I think that's inconsistent. Please go ahead, Sam, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get so caught up in what you're saying. And what I wanted to chat about was sort of the long-term strategy. If so, I guess maybe if you're willing, I can set this up, and it's kind of a horror story, and I'll try to keep it short.
What are you
And
trying? What's the general sense you're trying to get to? Can you give us a quick thumbnail at the top and then lay out the rest of it?
well, Israel, and okay, let me just summarize it. Hey, you know about the Ben Gurion Canal.
I
Do
do.
you think there's any plausible 75-year plan to build the Ben Gurion Canal?
Well, I think it's less than likely, but it's possible.
Okay, so can I make an argument for it and
Of course.
why I see it as being a big deal?
I think it's more for the natural gas resources than the canal, but it could be both. Anyway, go ahead.
So you might like this argument.
Okay.
So if you look historically, from the discovery doctrine that was issued by the Pope in what 1500, 1600, that sets up white supremacy, and basically the discovery doctrine establishes colonialism and settler colonialism. And if you look at the strength of the United States, or even just Europe, I mean, the first money came from the gold, and that wealth was transported to Europe, and basically, the Enlightenment kind of took off. The industrialization, it regenerated Europe because it was free money. The United States, after the revolution, acquired this huge resource base. And we had the Western miracle, and we won a war, and we had great prosperity. We became the hegemon of the world economically. Now we've depleted those resources. And we're looking around for some other influx of wealth. And the whole objective of colonialism, is world domination of one ideology of Christianity to rule the world. And so,
Well, not solely religious, but I would say it's also resource based and exploitation of others.
yeah, it's resource based in that the resources, it's like mushrooms growing. They grow wherever the resources go, and they go to dominate and create a monoculture in that resource space, and it will stretch out wherever the resources are. And this is an analogy. Mycelium is an analogy for Christianity, or even any sort of ideology that is expansionist.
So how is that
So,
applicable to the modern era? What are you trying to say?
well, we're in an economic struggle. We don't have any more expansion room in the United States. Now, with the Ben Gurion Canal, the first, and this is a 75-year plan. First thing is to extract the oil, secure the region for Israel, build a canal zone, build the canal. That changes the trade routes. That removes Suez Canal as a trade route. It reorients the trade routes to a military canal zone that's dominated by the West under, Israel. Israel is just going to be a client state of the United States, and it will change the trade routes, east and west. It will deprive Africa of wealth from the canal traffic, and that is the resource base that's going to expand the domination of Western powers, Western ideology, neoconservatism, into the Middle East It's if you've ever played whatever that game is,
Risk.
Risk.
Yeah, that's the geopolitical chessboard in general. I think it's a part of the puzzle. I think there are a lot of other parts of the puzzle. We'll see what's happening in Eurasia right now with Ukraine, which is not a big part of the geopolitical puzzle. The U.S. has positioned strategic assets and military bases in all of these theaters. And it has the same objective, and that's to bring countries and economic systems and shipping lanes and energy into its orbit of control and to exclude the emergence of entities like the Chinese and the Russians and others from emerging as competitors. And it's a struggle right now, and the U.S. is not prevailing in many of those struggles, which is what the frustration is.
And if we created a shorter, bigger, fatter, wider canal, that would dominate the east-west trade routes.
Samuel, listen, I don't know what you got going on there, my friend, but when you can talk through the phone, let's talk. If you can't, I understand you got other stuff you got to do. We just can barely hear you.
Oh, it's the headset.
So if you got to run around the kitchen and the house and do things, if you can't carry the phone with you, then let's talk later.
All right, let me turn my headset off and
Whatever you got to do. It's not fair to the audience to have you running around doing stuff like that. I'm trying to have a conversation.
okay. Can you hear me now? Oh shit,
Yep,
still
we can hear you well.
okay. So that's better.
Yep, that's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, basically, that's what I'm seeing is that America, like you said, I mean, late stage capitalism, it's a waning power. There's a significant social and political readjustment as far as our position in the world. The thing that the United States absolutely doesn't want to do is lose its dominant position in the world. And so when I see Biden sort of waffling and saying, we're, we want them to stop and we want food, but then they continue to supply weapons for the destruction of Palestine and they send, rancid food and build a $300 million pier that washes away. It's really not a credible commitment.
Yeah, I agree. For those of you who didn't hear this earlier, Ray Dalio, who owns a company called Bridgewater Capital, a very wealthy billionaire, has taken time to work on studying these historical cycles. And he points out that the Chinese economy and the Chinese population has really blossomed in the last couple of decades through their development plans. And they're ascending to new heights. And basically, they're leaving us in their dust. And in the next decade, the U.S. is trying to contain China right now. That's one of the big things. We rely on them for manufacturing. So there's this weird bad marriage where we have to have them to make our stuff because our corporations depend on them because they help source production. And at the same time, there's huge tensions between the nation state. It has the best of both worlds. It has a capitalist economy with authoritarian control of the Communist Party. So it's got sort of an unbridled chance to develop with no checks and balances on the central authority. So that's a big threat to the U.S. corporate influence. Chinese products and Chinese chips, by the way, I just heard this yesterday. The Chinese have developed supposedly a chip that is 300 times faster than the best NVIDIA product, which is being made in Taiwan right now. So it's supposed to be a new technology because they know the U.S. is most likely going to try to vie to take over Taiwan and prevent China from having a unification, which means that the Taiwan semiconductor factory that makes a lot of the microprocessors in the world is going to be under U.S. control, which is devastating to an internal economy for China. So China's developing their own technology, which, if it's accurate, is going to blow away the market, and they're going to dominate the chip market now, which would be devastating to companies like NVIDIA and the U.S. plan for hegemony over this key resource. So that's a big issue right now. The technology is a big part of the future. AI, these microprocessors are critical to powering the systems that are AI driven. And obviously, if China has a huge advantage in that technology, that puts the US at a huge disadvantage. And so that's going on. Again, these are all the little variables in the chessboard that are being fought over. It's complicated. It's not like it's all, and the American version of it, which really saddens me to hear people say, like that guy RTP talks. He just doesn't, I mean, not to sound condescending, he just doesn't have a fucking clue. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, but he doesn't know 90% of this stuff, and yet he thinks he's got it all figured out. So there is no American president. There are no American congressmen or senators who are going to directly change or threaten these things because the business interests who run the show are not going to let them. You do not get out of line. And if you do get too far out of line, as we found out with John F. Kennedy, you know what happens. There's only so far outside the bookends they let you stray. And if you stand outside them for long enough, well, then you know what goes on. It's just the way it is. So, unfortunately, they're placeholders. That's what I'm trying to say. And, they don't believe themselves in many cases to be placeholders. They believe in the system, but they're stuck in a bad game, and they know that. So it's sad, but that's where we are. So having said all that, I tell you what, I've not heard back from Sam. I'm not sure if he's busy getting his headgear worked out or just cleaning stuff in the kitchen or whatever. So, but I'm going to close it down, guys. It's been fun talking tonight. We've kind of gone the course of the conversation. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the rest of your holiday evening. I will see you soon.